You're listening to the Turn Autism Around podcast, episode number 183. Today, I have a special guest, Molly Ola Pinney, who is the founder and CEO of the Global Autism Project. Molly was previously on episode number 67, talking about what happened with the Global Autism Project once COVID hit and the world shut down. She is back on the show. This is actually something we haven't done for a long time, is we streamed this interview directly to Facebook Live on marybarbera.com/Facebook, because Molly is in a hurry to get the word out about the needs of Ukrainian families with kids with autism who are either in Ukraine or have migrated over to Poland. There's extensive needs and some of the issues that families face around the world. So let's get to this important interview with Molly Ola Pinney. So Molly, you have been on the Turn Autism Around podcast once before, and that was when 2020 hit, and it was very early 2020 after, the world shut down, and that is podcast number 67. We're going to link that in the show notes. But, so those of you that really want to know about your background can, go to that podcast and listen, because you have a really extraordinary background. But can you catch up our listeners? Like, how did you fall into the autism world?
Well, that's exactly how I fell into the autism world. So I was back about almost 20 years ago, actually 20 years ago now. I took a job working as what was called at the time an ABA therapist, working with this kid. I had initially been hired to babysit him while his mom went to look for other schools, because he had been kicked out of a classroom in which there was a pretty high ratio of teachers to students, but as a 6-year-old, they kicked him out of the classroom. And so I was initially babysitting him, and then his parents asked me if I would like to be trained as this thing called an ABA therapist. And I said, oh yeah, maybe. I really like this kid, he's really fun. And then after that, his family actually invited me to move to Ghana with them, where they were relocating. And it was there that the Global Autism Project was born. People started coming to my house looking for the lady who knew what autism was. And I suppose I had a general idea of what autism was at the time, although really I'd worked with very few kids. I was very new in the field. So I went online to try to find training for the folks in Ghana who were coming to me. And what I found were other people around the world also looking for services for training. And so at the age of 23, I started this thing called the Global Autism Project. And that was 19 years ago now.
Wow.
So weird.
Before 2020, you were coordinating fundraising and kind of boots on the ground in multiple countries to send therapists who would donate their time and raise the funding to go over and help families in multiple countries start better programming for kids, better care for kids, and decrease the maltreatment of children with autism in other countries. And then when 2020 hit, it was like a massive cut to funding, cut to all the trips, all the resources, and kind of put you into a tailspin. So I'm sure there's a whole lot that happened in the last 2 years in terms of like what you're doing, but we really want to focus this episode on Ukraine and the war. And the war hit a few months ago, and this podcast is going to be broadcast in early July. So I mean, we're assuming the war is still going to be going on in some fashion, but it really illustrates that all around the world there are needs, including in the United States, of families and children with autism. So why don't you, and you do have a link, and the link is
UkraineAutismRelief.com will redirect to our website, which is globalautismproject.org.
Okay, so Ukraine Autism Relief will and it'll redirect right to the Global Autism, and there's where you can make a donation. So I kind of want to put that out there a couple times.
Yeah, thank
But
you. Yeah, we can
yeah,
type in the comments as we go today.
yeah. So
Absolutely.
so why don't you tell us about Ukraine and just some of the devastation that you're seeing?
Yeah. So I just want to say, I know this is airing in July, and I think the biggest takeaway I had from our trip in Poland is when this war is over, it is not over for these families. They are not about to, the ones who have left are not about to go back home. Some of them have come from very badly devastated areas. The past 2 years of the Global Autism Project, to your point, we sort of lost overnight everything that we did. We lost the opportunity to travel, therefore our opportunity to fundraise, and everything kind of disappeared in the night very quickly, as it did for a lot of organizations. And what that really did, though, is it gave us an opportunity to look at, okay, we've lost the what and we've lost the how, but we've not lost the why. The why of this organization endures, the why of this organization, the why, because kids all over the world, no matter where they live, should have access to reach their potential. Families should feel supported and never alone and desperate. And so as we started learning more about what was happening for families in Ukraine, we went right back to that why. Right? That why, like, no one should feel alone and desperate right now. That's why this organization exists. So that when a family has a child with autism, no matter what's happening around them, they're not feeling alone and desperate because they know there's a world of support and a community out there. It's something that we tend to take for granted in the US. There's and it wasn't years ago, as I don't have to tell you, but there is now a fairly substantial community. And that just doesn't exist everywhere in the world. So as you said, a week ago, I was in Poland. The way that I ended up in Poland is I found an article written in Spectrum News. Someone forwarded it to me. And the subject line said, "We should feel really grateful. Look what's happening around the world." And I was like, I'm the founder and CEO of the Global Autism Project. I don't go like, oh, hey, we should feel really grateful. It didn't mean anything by it, but I was like, that's not how I'm going to read this, man. So I went to the Facebook group that was linked in the article, and there I posted, I'm the founder and CEO of the Global Autism Project. What's needed? What's happening? I've been thinking about you since the days I've seen the first videos of evacuation. And within a couple of hours, there were hundreds of comments. My Facebook Messenger inbox was like blowing up. People had found me on LinkedIn. They were emailing me. They found the website, and I was like, oh my goodness, like this is a little more than I even imagined would happen in terms of the level of people, the number of people we're talking to right now. So through these groups, I found this incredible group of moms who had basically been just single-handedly taking on getting families evacuated, finding families housing, getting supplies to families, whether it's sensory toys or diet needs or supplements or just toys to play with. I mean, these moms had just taken this on. And so I connected with all these moms very quickly. I asked the same question that I asked 20 years ago, like, where's the organization that's supporting this? Where's the organization that's training people around the world to work with kids with autism? Oh, it doesn't exist? Okay. Where's the organization that's supporting kids with autism in a crisis? Oh, it doesn't exist? Okay. And so I think that's the Global Autism Project. And so within just a couple, I think it was like within 10 days, we were on the ground in Poland, because the most important piece of this organization is that we do with and not for. We work globally. We don't think we know what's best globally. Mm-hmm. We think that there's a lot of passion, a lot of dedication, and a lot of talent. And we know that the local community knows what they need. And so we went there specifically to talk with families and to learn. I always say action creates clarity. It's like we went there being like, I think we're going to talk to some people. And
maybe we will.
Yeah, we left going, okay, here's the plan. Here's how we're going to do this, and it's a co-created plan. It's not just ours.
Yeah. And you had told me on the phone the other day that actually Ukraine did have some autism services before the war. Like they were fairly sophisticated in some autism care and treatment. Is that true?
Yeah. And of course, like any country, right? Not everywhere. Most of the services were limited, it sounds like, to major cities. But I've been pretty amazed, that I've met quite a few families at this point, and so far, none of them went to the same place, and they all had pretty great services. It also sounds like, what parents had talked to us about last week is that their kids weren't actively engaged all day. They were swimming, they were going to different activities. There was a lot of stuff like that kind of around the needs of the kid, which I thought was
before the war.
Before the war, yes.
And then everything shut down with the war, just like everything shut down for us with COVID. And that, was a real struggle. But now we have, a shutdown and terror and devastation and evacuations and all kinds of things. And you also spoke with families that remained in Ukraine.
We did. Yeah, we have. So I just want to, just for a minute, because I don't know that we're all aware when we just watch the news, right? Mm-hmm. The evacuation, I think on some level, I knew it was chaotic, right? We can see that. We can see buses and trains. And I was like, oh my gosh, where are the kids with autism?
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. Like, oh my gosh, that must be so hard.
Right. And then I also knew that some families had left by private car. And I think in my mind, I sort of imagined like, oh, if you left by private car, you just like got in your car and drove to Poland. It's not that, it's like a day and a half trip. No, that day and a half trip ended up being weeks long for people. They could only drive during the day. In some places, in cases there are no more roads or they are blocked. And so families are kind of following each other through these fields with bombs around them. There's also they're minefields, these fields that they're driving through at this point. So it's extraordinarily dangerous. And if you're on what should be a one-day journey that's taking 10 or 12 days, you're spending the night in these shelters. And, they're fortunate to have these shelters, obviously, but we went through in a couple of these, and you just have to imagine sort of like the biggest wedding tent you've ever seen, right? And then inside of that wedding tent is cots that are about probably 5-6 feet long and about maybe 2 feet wide. And they are next to each other, one after the other. And it's like this massive amount of space. And there's maybe 400 or 500 people in the room. They don't turn the lights off at night for safety. They keep the lights on because you have 400 or 500 people sleeping right next to each other with their belongings. So that drive out of Ukraine, even though people were in their own personal cars, they couldn't drive at night because of the danger. And there was so much traffic. And some people, had their dog with them or their cat with them, or we met a family who had, like a little lizard in a little mini terrarium, it's like this kid and his lizard. So the people who got out, they've been through a tremendously scary and stressful experience. And now you take a little kid who doesn't like to go a different way to school one day. And you think about the lockdown and the world stopping for us. It was like, we went home, we baked the food we want to bake. We were like, hey, this kind of works. I can't wait to re-listen to that episode we did.
Yeah.
Like time capsule.
Podcast 67. So marybarbera.com/67 to listen to the first podcast, which was in, probably it came out in April of 2020. You were my first guest to really address the COVID issue back then. But you're right. I mean, services stopped in a lot of cases, schools closed down in a lot of cases, and people were left. But like you said, they could still go into their bed and sleep, and they still could be safe and not, having devastation and horror all around them on top of everything stopping. And I'm even thinking like, Lucas is on a medication that he needs, like how would that work? I know many of our children are very picky eaters, and like
huge,
used to certain like ways to school, like you said, or certain clothing. And it's like, electricity with iPads, and I'm sure it's a huge struggle. And
Yeah.
in Ukraine, the men aren't allowed to leave. So a lot of times, I'm assuming you met mostly women with their children, even with autistic children in Poland. Is that correct?
Yeah. So what we've learned is that technically the men, if they have special needs children or 3 or more kids, they are technically allowed to leave. That
Okay.
being said, many were not able to. They were not able to produce the paperwork, or they didn't know, or what are you going to do? Drive for 12 days to be left at the border, So and then obviously they're fighting for their country. People
Yeah.
also are making the decision to stay and, support Ukraine. One of the things that I had not realized, and I haven't heard anything about, is there were a lot of Ukrainians living in Poland, and many of them were tradespeople. So about 70,000 Ukrainians returned to Ukraine at the start of the war, leaving construction projects half done. So now we have this influx of millions of people. We have a huge need to build infrastructure, and we can't create the infrastructure and the buildings because the contractors and the electricians and the plumbers have gone back to Ukraine. So there are so many layers to all of this, and it just really is. There's a complexity. There's a complexity to it on top of just the practical day to day. But then the emotional experiences that these kids are enduring, being in a bomb shelter, one kid who was totally fine with sounds before, now if he hears any sharp sounds, he throws himself on the ground in tantrums. And that's from living in a bomb shelter for 2.5 years.
Wow.
As a 4-year-old with autism.
Yeah. So, and I'm assuming we probably don't know what the autism rate is in Ukraine, but if it's anything like the United States, that's 1 in 44, it's a lot of kids. And those are kids with a diagnosis of autism. You also have lots of children with lots of other issues, medical issues, physical disability, emotional issues. And even if you had a completely, I don't even know if there's anything such as a completely typical child, but even if you have typical children, this, post-traumatic stress is got to be really a lifelong issue now. So, okay. So it is, it's good that we're talking about this, and there's, when I have watched the news and see, the devastation in Ukraine and the influx to Poland, and, so besides donating financial resources, which is ukraineautismrelief.com, and that redirects to the Global Autism Project, which has been around since 2003. That's the other thing, is like, people don't know where to donate money, that it's going to actually get to a good place. You made the trip to Poland. You are a reputable, you've been an award-winning, fundraiser and organizer. So I really do. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to have you on, is because I do really trust that the money that people would donate, that I would donate, that people would donate from my world would get into the right hands. But besides donations, of financial donations, is there anything else our listeners can do? I mean, we have listeners, we have participants in my programs from over 90 countries. So I have a really global audience here, but what can we do besides donating?
So, and I do want to touch on exactly what the donations are going to create as well. But, one of the things we're going to be doing is we are going to be these, well, I guess it all kind of goes together. So, so the donations are going to be used to actually help displaced Ukrainian therapists reopen their centers. So we've met some incredible therapists who had some amazing programs in Ukraine. And, the idea of starting over from nothing is just really daunting and overwhelming. These were their businesses that they ran. This was their livelihood. They provide therapy for 60, 80 kids at once. And now those kids, by the way, are all over. Some are still in Ukraine, some are in other parts of Europe, some are in the US. So we're going to actually be leasing the space and supporting these people and reopening their therapy centers. So reopening their therapy centers. And then of course we have to fill them with materials and tools and toys and all the fun things. And so that's one thing that we're doing. The other thing is, as I said, a lot of Ukrainian tradespeople have left Poland. So we are actually physically rehabbing some buildings that we're going to be able to use. So some underutilized or unused buildings. We're going to be doing that. And so that's where the donations go. In terms of what you can do, our Skill Core program is what we're going to be using to help provide the training and the actual support, the day-to-day support at these centers. And so you can learn more about that on our website, globalautismproject.org. In the next couple of weeks, we'll have some of these Polish sites where you'll be working with both Polish and Ukrainian students. There's a shortage of services all over the world. And I knew our organization would be engaged somehow in supporting the autism families, families who have autistic loved ones. I did not know, I hadn't quite realized that the shortage of services all over the world means that what we do best, which is build capacity for services, is actually a response to a humanitarian crisis right now.
Right.
And so that's what we'll be doing. It will be, because there's a shortage of services already in Poland, these centers will employ Polish and Ukrainian teachers. This will be open for Polish and Ukrainian students. It's going to be very, very important throughout this process that Ukrainian and Polish families are forming relationships. They're neighbors now, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to.
And you also, at your website, I noticed you have some Ukrainian language. Are you also in that UkraineAutismRelief.com? You're asking for donations in one button, but you're also asking for Ukrainian families to connect with you that need services. So you're kind of like a matchmaker in terms of funding and services. Is that correct?
We're also currently with a partnership with Operation White Stork. We're also able to provide emergency 30-day housing vouchers to all of our families. Okay. And so that Ukrainian language says, you know, let us know what you need. Do you need housing? Through a partnership with Project Apollo, we're actually able to provide evacuation support. So families that were not able to leave on a train or a bus, families that did not have a private car to leave, we have a partnership with a group that's bringing in private vehicles and able to get our families who want to leave and can leave out. You brought up the medications. One of the reasons that some people are in Ukraine still is because they don't have the medications to allow their loved one to relax enough to be able to do this drive. Yeah. So it's a very real, there's so many pieces of it. Now, some families do want to stay. Some families have made the choice that this is Ukraine, there's safe parts of Ukraine and I want to stay. Obviously we were in Poland, so the majority of people we talked to did not want to stay. But it's a challenging thing. And I think it's easy for us to look and say like, well, I wouldn't stay, or, you know, and it's like, you actually don't know. You actually have no idea. You know, like when a tank's rolling down your street, then you say what you do. Right.
And everybody has different circumstances and they have to make their own choice.
They have elderly family members who don't want to leave or can't leave, and kids with autism. I mean, there's complexity to it for sure. Yeah. Yeah.
So I think we've given, you know, some great information out. It is kind of sad and depressing, but that's the reality of what's happening now. And we just have to support families in Ukraine and Poland and around the world. Anybody, you know, can be suffering with crises and with hardships. So I think we'll wrap it up before I let you go. I also want to hear any not just for the families in Ukraine or Poland, but all of us, how we want to reduce our stress and lead happier lives. So do you have any stress reduction tips or self-care tips that you can give to our listeners before we let you go?
You're talking to someone who's been working 20 hours a day on this year. I'm like, that's a funny question. I said to someone recently, well, I fell asleep right before this meeting for a few minutes. So I think I'm good for a minute. I think really this became just really important to us on this trip. And with these families is really just taking time, taking a moment, feeling all that there is to feel. There is so much happening in the world right now. There's so much that's impact, it's like we came back from Poland to the news of the Buffalo shooting. And it's just like, where does this even end? And I think, we were supposed to be featured on NBC, and then they said, oh, we actually have to focus on the Buffalo shooting. Sorry about that. It's like the news cycle is moving so quickly. Everything is moving so quickly. And I think like, it's really easy to get distracted from one thing to the next. It's really easy to think that we can only focus on one thing. And, I think really just like feeling it all and being with it has been really important, not only for our team, but for some of the Ukrainian families that we met as well. So,
yeah. Well, thank you for your time coming and telling us about the needs of families in Ukraine and in Poland. And I wish you the best
and I'll go check the comments. I know we're streaming live and I know we didn't get to the comments.
Yeah. And I can check them too, but so thank you for your time, and we will be praying for you, and hopefully we'll be donating to help your cause.
Thank you so much. You can also set up your own fundraising page on our website. If you scroll all the way to the bottom, so you can set up your own crowdfunding page.
Oh, nice. Okay. Yeah. Well, we'll check that out. All right. Thank you, Molly.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.